All right, let's dive in. Today, we're heading back in time to the world of the ancient Maya.
Always a fascinating subject.
Yeah, and this time it's even more exciting. Well, at least to me.
Oh, why is that?
Because we're going underwater.
You mean like the Maya ruins at the bottom of a cenote?
Even cooler than that. We're talking about an entire network of structures, all perfectly preserved beneath the water in Belize.
Wow, that's incredible. I hadn't heard about this.
It's pretty recent. There was an article about it just the other day. Apparently, they found something like 70 underwater sites.
70. That's a lot.
Right. And over 4,000 wooden posts.
So this isn't just like a little village or something. We're talking about a pretty big complex.
Exactly. And that's what's so amazing about it. It gives us a glimpse into this whole other side of Maya life that we knew almost nothing about.
What were the structures used for?
Salt production.
Salt. Really? That's so interesting. You wouldn't think something as basic as salt would require such elaborate structures.
I know, right? But salt was absolutely essential to the Maya.
Of course, for preserving food, right?
Yeah, especially in that humid Yucatan climate. No refrigeration back then.
Makes sense. So how did they make it? Did they just boil seawater or something?
Pretty much. They had these things called salt kitchens where they'd boil massive pots of seawater over fires.
Wow. I can just imagine the scene. Workers constantly tending the flames, the air thick with salty steam. That must have been pretty intense.
Yeah, it paints quite a picture. And the sheer number of these kitchens suggests that salt production was a pretty big deal for them.
Like a major industry.
Definitely. But here's where things get really interesting. The article mentions one site called Na that was different from all the others. It really threw archaeologists for a loop.
Oh. What was so special about Jaina?
Well, for one thing, it didn't have nearly as many broken pottery fragments as the other salt works.
Huh. That seems strange. You'd think an older site would have more broken pots, not fewer.
That's what I thought too. But it turns out Na is actually older than the other sites.
Really? How much older?
Radiocarbon dating puts it in the early classic period, somewhere between 250 and 600 AD.
Wow, so we're talking centuries older. Does that explain the lack of pottery?
It might. Archaeologists think that Na was a much smaller, more localized operation, probably just serving a nearby community.
Ah, so it was like a small family business compared to the big salt factories we see later on.
Exactly. As the Maya civilization grew and more people moved inland, away from the coast, the demand for salt exploded.
Makes sense. They needed a way to preserve their food, and salt was the key.
Right. So during the late classic period, from around 650 to 800 AD, salt production really took off. It went from these small local operations to being part of these vast trade networks.
Wow, so salt went from being a local necessity to a major commodity.
Exactly.
And that probably had a big impact on Maya society, right? Like economically and politically.
Definitely. Imagine if you were a Maya ruler and you controlled the salt supply. You'd have a lot of power.
Yeah, you could set prices, forge alliances, maybe even use it as leverage in conflicts.
Exactly. So as you can see, salt was much more than just a seasoning for the Maya. It was a driving force in their economy, their politics, and their daily lives.
That's fascinating. And it's amazing how much we can learn about an entire civilization just by studying something as simple as salt.
I know, right? And this is really just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to uncover, like the evidence from this other site, Wild Cane K, which gives us a glimpse into how the Maya were actually using all that salt.
Oh, now I'm really intrigued. What did they find at Wild Cane K?
We'll get to that in just a minute. So spill the beans. What's so special about this Wild Cane K place?
Well, unlike those underwater salt works, Wild Cane K wasn't about making salt.
It wasn't.
Nope, it was a settlement.
So like a village then.
Exactly. And when they started digging, they found a ton of fish bones.
Okay, so they ate fish.
Well, yeah, but it's more than that. The sheer quantity, it was a huge amount.
So they really liked fish.
It points to something a lot bigger. They must have been preserving those fish on an industrial scale.
And to preserve fish, especially in that climate, you need
Salt.
salt, of course. It all ties together, doesn't it?
Like a puzzle. You've got your salt factories, people moving inland, needing that salt, and then boom, Wild Cane K shows us how they used it.
To create this whole other product they could trade, preserved fish.
Exactly. And that tells us something pretty important about the Maya. They weren't just scraping by,
I had this whole complex economic system in place.
Right. They were taking a basic resource like salt, turning it into something more valuable, something they could trade across huge distances.
And it wasn't just about the fish, right? When you have those trade routes, all those people moving around.
You start to get ideas and culture spreading too.
Like imagine those Maya traders sailing along, carrying their salt and fish.
Meeting new people, swapping stories, who knows what else.
It's kind of like their version of social media connecting everyone.
And that brings us back to that earlier site, JE. Now, remember?
The one that was older than the others.
Right, and that suggests maybe this whole interconnected system, this trading and cultural exchange.
It might have been going on a lot earlier than we thought.
Exactly. Before those big city-states even popped up.
So basically, our whole understanding of how Maya society developed, it could be wrong.
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Every new discovery, whether it's salt works underwater or a pile of old fish bones, it adds to the picture, you know?
It's like we're constantly learning, constantly refining what we thought we knew.
And that's what makes archaeology so cool. You never know what you're going to find next.
And we started with just salt. It's crazy to think how much we've learned from something so simple.
It's a window into their lives, really, isn't it? How they ate, traded, even how their society was structured.
And I bet there are lessons there that go way beyond the Maya.
Oh, absolutely. Things we can learn about how we manage resources today. Our own interconnected world.
That's a great point, and I think it's something worth exploring further. Okay, so we've spent all this time talking about Maya salt, but what does that have to do with us today? It's not like we're trading salt for fish anymore.
True, but I think there are some parallels that are pretty relevant.
Like what?
Well, the Maya, they were completely reliant on salt.
Yeah, it was essential for them.
And that highlights something important about resource management, something we don't always think about, even today.
You mean like how easily those resources can be disrupted?
Exactly. Think about it. We might have plenty of salt now, but it still takes a whole system to get it to us.
We mine it, process it, ship it all over the world.
Right, and any of those steps, something could go wrong. Natural disaster, political problems, even the economy going haywire.
It makes you realize just how vulnerable we are.
And the Maya, they probably had to deal with similar stuff, right? Droughts, wars, who knows what else.
So maybe by studying them, we can learn how to deal with those kinds of problems.
Exactly. How they adapted, how they kept things going when times got tough.
So it's not just about ancient history, it's about the future, too.
Absolutely. Plus, there's another lesson here, I think, about those simple things we take for granted.
You mean like salt?
Yeah. The Maya, they built this whole civilization around it.
And now we just grab it off the shelf without even thinking about it.
It makes you wonder, right? What else are we missing?
Like what other simple things are actually super important, but we don't even realize it?
Exactly. What if the solutions to all our problems are right in front of us, just like salt was for the Maya?
That's kind of a mind-blowing thought.
It is, isn't it? And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from all this. We need to be open to new ideas, new ways of thinking.
We need to look to the past, to other cultures, to find those hidden gems of knowledge.
Because those ancient societies, they might have been onto something,
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to remember?
I'd say take a moment to think about all those little things you rely on every day. The food you eat, the water you drink, even just having a roof over your head.
Don't take it for granted.
Exactly. And think about all the people, all the work, all the history that goes into making those things possible. And then ask yourself, what can we learn from all that to make the future better, more sustainable, more fair for everyone?
I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure. Always happy to talk about the Maya, especially when there's salt involved.